Hey guys, it's Chris with Live Life Outdoors. Certainly been a long time since I've posted a video. It's been a crazy year, obviously, for everyone. Believe it or not, my wife and I had another baby. So that's been crazy, baby number 2. And that took up a lot of my time, of course, and I really wanted to focus on my family. Also, 2020 was just a crazy year for everyone. I actually got job promotion at work, and then pandemic hit, and I was deemed an essential worker, so I still was working during that time. I was pretty fortunate, but it was also kind of just scary, and especially with my wife having a baby right in the middle of the pandemic, a lot of focus went on my family. So I'm certainly glad that things are lightening up to where I can get back onto getting videos back on YouTube. This one's actually going to be a fun series. This is going to be me building a 300 Blackout Pistol. Now, it's kind of one of those words right now in 2021. Pistols are not really popular with certain entities. I'm going to be using a pistol brace, and at the time of filming this video, they haven't been banned, but there's been an attempt already, and now there's an attempt to further regulate them. But at the time I bought it, and at the time of filming this, there isn't anything, so I plan on just using it right now with no problems, and I'll adapt to whatever comes in the future. We always do. I know a lot of videos came out in 2020 for pandemic AR builds. This is kind of a pandemic build in that I collected all the parts as they became available throughout the summer, fall, and winter of 2020. But just never had time to actually build it. So it's kind of a pandemic build. My previous video series have been building guns on budgets. I'm not going to call it that just because a lot of people gave me grief about the fact that I used some upgraded parts, even though it was supposed to be a budget build. So I am going to be using very inexpensive parts for this build. But a few parts I've upgraded, like the bolt carrier group, I went with a nickel boron. The handguard is not just simply a polymer mag pull or anything. It's actually an aluminum key mod hand grip. So you'll see some of the parts as I go. So it's not a budget build, but I am using pretty inexpensive parts for the most part. I'll actually, at the end of the series, with YouTube regulations, I'm not actually going to be able to post parts lists and where I got them to YouTube anymore. So what I will do is I'll just simply post those onto my Patreon page, and I'll put a link for that so you guys can see that. And then that way you'll be able to see what I used. But that being said, it will be a pistol build. I'll be using a 7.5-inch barrel, and I'm excited. It's going to be a fun series, so hope you enjoy. So, as I said, kind of inexpensive parts. We're going to start this video off with a lower receiver. This is a stripped receiver. It's Anderson Manufacturing. I actually bought this a while ago, a couple years. I think it was 2018 when I bought this, because I knew I was eventually going to do another gun build, and this was on a sale, so I couldn't pass it up. And then it's not the most glamorous of packaging. AR Stoner, complete lower parts kit. This was also on a huge sale around the same time I bought the receiver, so I've just been holding on to these, waiting for a good opportunity to build. Plus I couldn't make up my mind on what I was going to build, so I will be using those parts in the video today. So I'm going to be doing kind of a step-by-step like I usually like to do, and I hope you guys enjoy. It's going to be a lot of fun, so let's get started. Parts for the first step are the mag catch spring, and mag catch button. Okay, so first we're going to start with the magazine release. So first you're going to start on the left side of the receiver, and you're going to want to get this part here from the lower parts kit and put it inside of this slot. Then when we turn this around, here you see the threads coming out the other side here. So we take the large spring, this guy here, and slip that on to the threads. And then you have the mag release button right here. You see how there's some texture there? You're going to want to have that facing out, so it kind of gives your finger something to grip. And you just push that on, And it's going to push that bar outside the other side of the receiver, outside the right side when you push it on there. And all you're trying to do is just get those threads to go. So you do want to have that freely spinning on the back. I'll actually show you a picture of that. Okay, so from the left side, when I push that mag button in, you can see this comes out. And when you're pushing it in, you start threading it like this. Sorry, it's hard to do this with the camera. But you do that, and then don't let it scratch the receiver. Once you start to feel it getting close and it's actually threaded and on there, let me show you what to do from the other side. So from this other side here, what you can do is you can use a tool of some sort. I just like to use like a pencil because of the rubber eraser doesn't scratch this. But you push that button all the way in as far as you can. And then that way you can see I'm threading it from the other side and it's not even getting close to the receiver. And you just want to go until that screw is about flush with the face of that button. So I'm going to go a few more times around. Let's see, that looks pretty darn close. Let's let that slide into that slot there and see how we're... Oh, it's got a little bit more. And again, I apologize. Having the camera here in front of my face while I'm trying to focus on this is a little difficult. Yeah, that feels perfect. So it's just kind of flush to the face a little bit there. And for those who are wondering, this is just simply a bench vise here, just a small one that I have kind of portable. And then I have this vise block. A lot of guys asked me on my previous videos what this is. This was just, I got this off of eBay. I think the brand was Nomar or something, but all it is just basically a polymer block that sits in the mag well of the receiver, so it can hold it still while you're doing your build and working on the lower parts kit. So I do recommend getting one of those. It's a pretty nice setup. I've found it to be completely indispensable. So once you've got this button in, you can actually put a mag in, make sure it retains the magazine, and then of course depress it, make sure it releases it. I won't do that on camera, but I'm going to test it a couple of times, make sure it works, and we'll move on to the next step. The parts for this step are the trigger guard and the trigger guard roll pin. Okay, our next step is to install the trigger guard here because my receiver did not come with one, but the lower parts kit had it. So here's the plate there. It's got this little spring detent. So you put that in while kind of depressing it. You just slide her in, clicks into place like so. The other piece just slides in between these flanges, ears, whatever you want to call them. And then we take this larger detent and install it here. Now you want to be careful to A, make sure that this is lined up, and B, these are kind of fragile at times, so you want to make sure that you're kind of cautious as you're hammering this in, not to go too crazy. I would recommend getting a non-marring hammer. This is one that I got, and again I can put links to this on my Patreon page so I don't get in trouble with YouTube again. And it's got a brass side, a polymer side, and then a steel side that you can actually replace because these unscrew and screw in. So it's kind of a cool little set. I really like it. Just an FYI. But just put that in, kind of line everything up. Once you get close to finishing it on through, I recommend getting a punch, because that way you don't want to really be smacking your flange squarely, but we're just going to use this punch and see if we can't tap it on in. Tap it on home. Okay, there we go. Just needed a little bit larger punch and a little bit more mustard, but we got it on in. Parts for the next step are the bolt catch spring, roll pin, and the bolt catch buffer. Okay, so we're going to be moving on to the next step, which is going to be the bolt catch or bolt catch release, whatever you want to call it. And first, we need to get the spring. There's a little teeny hole right in here, and we're going to put this spring in there. This goes right in there. Next, you have bolt catch buffer. It's this little rounded guy here. That goes skinny side into the spring. And then you put in your bolt catch release, but before we get going too far, right in here is a roll pin, and it's a small guy. It's kind of a beast. So what we do is I put some masking tape on this side so I don't mar or scratch the finish of my receiver. Put some on this side for good measure in case I have my Wheaties and miss or whatever. But anyway, this is where that non-marring face really comes in handy to get that roll pin in there. Another thing that would help is if you have like a roll pin punch. I actually made my own. This was just a long screw. And what I did is, you can kind of see it. It's kind of out of focus, I apologize, but I basically ground this down so it was nice and smooth, and then I drilled a hole inside of the screw. So that way, instead of using like pliers or something, my roll pin just fits on inside there a little bit to hold it in place. Like so. So that will hold it, and then that way I can get this going and start at the inside as I start punching that in there. So kind of a neat little tool. I know they sell them, but I'm cheap and just wanted to make my own because I had the resources. So I'm just going to get this started on in there. Okay, it's started. Okay, so now we just hold the actual bolt catch into place up top here. It's kind of tricky to get this lined up. It's under a little bit of spring tension right there, so getting it lined up sometimes is a little tricky, but just kind of put your finger there and hope for the best. See that? I'm already hitting that masking tape a little bit because I had to use a little bit of mustard to get that in there, but that's why we don't let that scratch our surface. We put the masking tape there. Now I can be a little bit more careful and use a punch to finish her off as well. Okay, there you have it. Didn't scratch up anything on the receiver. I just hit the masking tape a couple of times, and this is going to work perfect. Parts for this step are the pivot pin detent, and the pivot pin detent spring. Okay, next we're going to install the front pivot pin, as they call it. It's actually the larger of the two, between the takedown pin and pivot pin. It's the larger one that goes in front. And you'll see that there is a hole right here, and that's actually where we put this long spring. And then the detent pin. Now this is where it gets a little tricky, because we're going to be putting that in, keeping it like under spring tension, under pressure, and then putting the pin through these holes. Now, they make tools for this, but I've actually found a little trick that I think is pretty slick, and you don't have to have any special tools for it. You just have to have a razor blade or a box cutter. So you just put that in. You can see that the detent pin is just kind of resting there. And then you just take your razor blade or box cutter, something extremely flat, push it up against in there, like so. And then you can get your pin in. See that? Pretty slick. I know they have like lots of cool tools. I may or may not have bought one, wink wink, but this is actually so much faster and easier. I love doing it. It's just cheap, and all you need is a razor blade. Parts for this step are the trigger pin, trigger spring, the disconnector spring, and disconnector. Okay, so let's move on to the fire control group. We'll start at the trigger because obviously that goes down at the bottom here. So you're going to start with your trigger spring. It's important to note the trigger spring has this little bend here at the bottom. They're almost like little feet. Your disconnector and your disconnector spring. One thing I wanted to talk about the disconnector spring, it's kind of tough to see, but at the bottom of the spring it flares out. So you are going to want to put the flare on the bottom. And you see in this little trench that's on the trigger, there's a little circle that's cut out there. So you put the flared end down into that little circle. It holds it into place for you. Then you're going to put your spring on, and you just kind of twist it in there from the bottom here. So careful you don't pinch your fingers. I have before, and it's certainly not pleasant. So Spring goes on like so. And then you put your disconnector down in, and then you can kind of see there's this little groove taken out of the back of the disconnector. That goes over the disconnector spring. So this whole assembly goes down inside the receiver, and then you put your pin in. Now the pin can go in on the right or the left, it doesn't matter which, nor does it really matter where the grooves go. I do like to do it from the left side and put the grooves in first, it's just personal preference. So you're going to push this down and try to get everything to line up, and so it's easy to look down the top of the receiver. And again, kind of using your thumb on the disconnector, your other fingers down below, just kind of getting that to line up in there. Okay, there we go. A few little taps with the non-marring hammer. You're going to want to push down on the disconnector to get it to line up, because that's pushing down on the spring that's inside the trigger, and then the trigger is pushing down on the spring that's in the receiver. So all of it kind of just is a matter of tweaking it to get it all to line up. And there you go. There you have it. There your trigger's in. Feels good. Parts for this step are the hammer, hammer spring, and hammer pin. Okay, next we're going to do the hammer. Now the hammer, we just have this and the hammer spring. Now this is where it gets really painful if you pinch your fingers. So anyway, you just stick it in like so. And there. So there you have it. That's the orientation it goes. And then what you're going to do is these legs of the spring right here, this is basically how it's going to go when you put it inside. You put these legs behind the trigger pivot pin, and then you pull it forward, and what that does is put the spring under tension, and you pull this all the way to where the hammer pin goes. So it's quite a bit of pressure, so you're going to want to kind of be careful, make sure you're ready to go. But yeah, you just rest these legs inside the receiver where the trigger pin goes. So put that in there, and just kind of muscle your way down to lining it up. It might take one or two tries. Here we go. There it goes. A few little taps there. There. It's a matter of getting it lined up. So now you can test it. It'll click, the back end of the hammer will click onto the disconnect. Pull it and let it go. Do not let this hammer slam on the front of your bolt catch here. But click, pull the trigger, that releases, back, click onto the disconnector, pull. There you go. Functioning and working well. Parts for this step are the pistol grip, safety selector, selector detent, selector spring, pistol grip screw, and lock washer. Okay, so what I didn't tell you is I was putting in the safety selector here from where it says fire safe. Obviously that's where you want your knob to go. And in doing so, I realized after I had put in the fire control group that the safety selector was not going in because it was hitting the back end of the trigger assembly. Now, that's the first time I've run into that. I don't know how common of an issue it is, but the first time I've run into it, and I've built a couple of guns. So kind of watch out for that. I had to essentially put in the safety selector and slide the back end, kind of twist the trigger under it. And so I just did all that off camera because I don't want to waste your guys' time. But yeah, just kind of had to slide it in there. So FYI, you might want to try to do that first next time. But now that that is in, you get your safety selector detent and put that down, sharp side pointing down into the hole here on the side of the receiver. Of course, big fat fingers don't help. Okay, and then we have this spring that'll go into the pistol grip. Now we need to install the pistol grip at the same time as the safety selector detents and everything, and then your screw that'll hold on your pistol grip. So you slide the spring in that little hole there, and then you kind of work it in. Now one scary thing here is when you're pushing this down and that spring's there, don't crush it. Make sure you feed the spring into that hole, otherwise you'll crush it. So what I like to do is just kind of put that in the hole and just kind of gently guide the pistol grip down. Sometimes it takes a little persuading. Okay, so that actually took a lot of persuading. But anyway, so you get that in there, and you can even just kind of put it partially on, and then make sure you got the top in the pistol grip, bottom in that hole, and then just very carefully slide that straight down without bending that pin. Then you take your screw, feed it in with a screwdriver, and screw in your pistol grip, and that takes care of the safety selector. Let's get that screwed in. Okay, once you got the safety selector in and the pistol grip secured with that screw, you want to perform a little functionality test. So tuck it back. You can hear it click. Of course it's unsafe. Does not fire. Onto fire. And it does. And again, don't let that hammer slam home, otherwise you'll potentially excuse me, break your bolt catch release. Now, on to the next step. Parts for this step are the buffer tube, buffer spring, and buffer, takedown pin, detent, detent spring, and then the buffer retainer, retainer spring, castle nut, and receiver end plate. Okay, next you're going to want to take your buffer tube or your receiver extension tube, however you want to call it, and your castle nut. You want to thread your castle nut quite a ways onto it. Then you want to take your end plate, and you see how there's that little bump out in it. You want to have that facing towards the receiver. There's a little concave section of the receiver that actually engages there, so you want that to go on as well. On the bottom of your buffer tube there's a little notch where that notch of that end plate goes in, so just slide that in. And then take it to the receiver. Okay, so here we are on the back of the receiver. So first things first, we're going to take our buffer retainer spring and put that in that little hole there. We're going to take our buffer retainer. Now, a couple of features are important here to know. So there's a little flat part all around, and then a little pin sticking on top of the retainer. That obviously goes up. You'll see why here in a minute. Let's put that on top, like so. Okay, then we take our buffer tube assembly there that we just created. We start threading that on. There we go. Okay, we just thread it. You want to have that engaged. To just start to touch the buffer retainer. You push that down, and then you just do it the last quarter turn there. And what that does, you saw the threads coming forward. It holds the buffer retainer down on that flat little rim around there, so that way the buffer retainer is not going anywhere. It's being held in place. And then the pin is still sticking up, and that's what actually lives up to its name. It retains the buffer, and then we'll show you that here in a moment. But before we go any further, we want to take our rear takedown pin. You see that groove there? That's going to face towards the back, towards the buffer tube. We're going to want to put that in. So I'm going to put it in this side. So put that in. Take our little detent, and there's a little hole in the back of the receiver. You can kind of see that little rim there. So let's get that plate out of the way. Stick detent and this little teeny detent spring. We're going to put that in place. Now we're just going to move this end plate forward and then that's going to push against the spring, put it under tension, and push that detent, locking in the takedown pin. So we're just going to kind of work its way forward. Try not to let that spring bind up or bend or kink in any way. Okay, then get your receiver end plate here, that little bump engages on the bottom here of the receiver. There's a little, that little concave that we talked about, little concave hole right there. That's now fully engaged in there. And then you just take your castle nut, thread that on home. Okay, once that's kind of finger tight, there's a special castle nut wrench. It's got these little pins, whatever you want to call them, teeth, that coincide with these indents on the castle nut. So just put that on there, give it a good healthy turn. You don't want to over tighten it, but enough to keep it in place there. Once we have that, I'm going to rotate this a bit so you can see. So I've cocked the hammer back to get it out of our way. I'm going to put our buffer spring in. Just kind of feed that on in. Take our buffer, put that inside the spring, and then just push that back. And there you have it. So now you can see a really good view. So you have your face of your buffer, and then that buffer retainer right there. That little pin is holding back the buffer. So kind of a cool little design there. I like that. But so there you have it, guys. Installation of lower parts kit. Standard AR-15 now, but it's going to be for the 300 Blackout pistol build. If you liked what you saw, please hit that like button, help me out, and also if you're not subscribed, please make sure you do subscribe because you'll see the continuation of the build. Got some other fun videos planned, may or may not have gotten a suppressor. We're going to see how quiet we can get this thing, we'll reload for it, and so forth. Got a lot of fun plans coming up here, so make sure you do subscribe and continue watching for those fun new videos I've got coming out. But most importantly, don't forget to live life outdoors.